Hi there, welcome back. Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio, and we are hitting issue number 4 in this video. The flat side of the moon is what I called it. A little play on Pink Floyd there. And I'm good to go now. I have my tea. I'm ready to talk and play a bit and hopefully clarify some issues for you. And I'll see you on the flip side of the video. See ya. Okay, I'm back. I still have my tea. I always need it. You'll learn that about me as we hang out together, and just makes me feel good. Anyway, I'm hoping that the series so far is at least giving you a bit more insight into obviously the major scale, because we have spent a lot of time on that, and to make sure that your understanding of the structure of it is really sinking in, not only intervallically, which is with regards to the tones and the semitones, but also the sound of it. The sound is important. At this stage of the game, here's a bit of a review, you should be able to grab any random note somewhere down here at the lower end of the fretboard, and along that string that you've chosen, be able to play the sound of a major scale. Skill number 1. Skill number 2 is if you took the same scale, having played it using your interval knowledge, and that's a visual game mostly, to go back and actually identify the note names that you played. Keep those two skills in the back of your mind as we're moving through this series, because the more intuitive those two skills feel, the easier everything becomes, because all you're doing is relating new concepts back to the sound of the major scale and the architecture or the interval structure of the major scale. So of all the stuff we've covered so far, those would be the two main skills to extract. Even though we've talked about a lot of ideas, those two skills need to be front and center up here. Having said that, in the previous issue, we started to work with what happens when you play a major scale from any other note other than C. And as you know already, the key of C has no sharps or flats in it, because it's comprised of what I refer to as the natural notes that our musical system is made up of. So in that case, if I come here to the C note on first fret, second string, do the interval formula thing. I like to throw those little musical moments in there just to make it sound a bit more interesting to myself. And then go back and, of course, be very comfortable with the note names. C, D is always 2 frets away, a tone. E is always 2 frets away from D, another tone. F is 1 fret, a semitone. F to G is a tone. G to A is a tone. A to B is a tone. B to C. That should be old school for you right now. And if we take that idea and start it on any other note, let's say this one. No, I think we did this one last time. This was the G. And we walk through identifying where the natural notes would lie if we just played them from the G note, as if we were playing some kind of a G scale. We know ahead of time, I hope you do, that it's not going to sound like a major scale until we do some tweaking. Here is the G some kind of scale using only the natural notes that you're already aware of, and utilizing your knowledge of the distance between those notes, the interval structure. So here it is. We've got G to A, that's a whole tone, easy. A to B, whole tone. B to C, semitone. C to D, whole tone. D to E, another whole tone. E to F is a semitone. And remember, at that point, we still want another tone, but we don't have one right now. So E to F, semitone. And then finally F to another G, an octave higher. So here's what it sounds like. Again, once I stop talking, here it is. And like I mentioned in the previous video, most of it sounds like a major scale. This portion sounds just fine. And then it goes off the rail right there before it finishes up on the last G. And where it went off the rail was on that F note. That's at the 13th fret on the first string. And what had to happen in order to turn that little semitone into a whole tone, you can't do anything to the E because it's locked into the D previous to it. So the only thing you can alter at this point is the F. And the F, if you can see it clearly here on the fretboard, it had to be pushed up 1 fret. And you know by now, anytime you're taking any note and you're raising it in pitch by 1 fret, you're sharpening the note. It can be named 2 different sounds, which I have alluded to in the series. In the context of G, we have to name it some kind of an F. And the reason for that is, by definition, when all these scale ideas were created, the notion was that if whatever letters you're constructing the scale out of, you could only have some kind of letter from the alphabet only once. So some kind of a G, some kind of an A, some kind of B, C, D, E, F, and G. You can't have 2 types of Fs in a row or 2 types of Bs in a row. That just complicates things way too much. So the F has to be brought up, and because we've only got an F, we can't call it anything else, and we raised it in pitch, you know by now we have to call it F sharp. It can also be called G flat, but we can't do this. We can't go E, G flat, and then G. It's just one of those conventions of how scales are created, and it does make a lot of sense. It keeps things really simple. So we're not calling it G flat, we're going to call it F sharp. So now when I made that adjustment, here's the sound of it. This is all review. Back down. That should be old school for you at this point. Shouldn't even have to have a conversation about that. Now, I gave you exercises to work on. Hopefully you did. But I get that they're not the most exciting things to do, but I urge you to try them out. I don't care how long it takes you to do it. You can do it over weeks or months, but involve yourself in it. Play the scales that are listed in issue 3, where we go through the sharp keys with using that what looks like a hashtag sign, but in music we call it a sharp. And now what we're doing is doing exactly the same process, but we're utilizing a different perspective. We're going to be working with what are called the flat keys. And I have the issue right in front of me here. I do need to make a note to you of this. I hope you can see this. I'll just hold it up here, kind of nice and close. Do you see that? Yeah, it's a G flat. Do you see the G flat in the middle of the page? Well, it looks like a G with a lowercase b beside it. I've had some comments on this. Well, I had one comment on it from a subscriber of mine, and he was confused by that. He said, why are there B notes against each of the other large case other letter notes? And it occurred to me, of course, that what I didn't make a point of is that, at least for now, in this particular program, it's not capable of producing the true shape of what a flat symbol looks like. The symbol that was revealed in issue 3. I showed you pictures of the sharp sign, and I showed you pictures of the flat sign as well. Let me review that for you. Pull this out. Pull that up. You see the sharp sign on the left and the flat sign on the right. I hope I have that correct looking at the camera. So it's this thing right here. There's the sharp sign, looks like the hashtag. There's the flat sign. It does look like a lowercase b. So in this particular program, when I'm writing these things out, it doesn't have that symbol, at least not to my knowledge. I haven't found it. So I have to use a lowercase b. So for your purpose, those are not b's. They are flat signs. They are telling you to play some note flat, another note flat, etc., etc. Just to be clear on that, so you understand how I've written things out. Okay, so this shouldn't be difficult from the point of view of playing any flat key. Don't worry why there are flat keys. That's a whole other discussion. We could have a series of sessions on something called the circle of fifths, or the cycle of fifths, or the circle of fourths, same thing, that can more or less start to explain why these things are existing the way they do. But I don't want you to get confused with this at all at this point. I want you to have some functional skills that we can use, get really good at right now, and then start to apply them to other areas that you use every day in your playing. That's what I want to get out of it. Maybe later we can feed back or loop back and fill in some holes to make the picture even more clear. But for the time being, so let's just grab a note. I'm going to grab this note, 3rd string, 1st fret. If you think about it, I hope you can identify the name of that note as a flat key. You might also be able to identify it as a flat note. You might also be able to identify it as a sharp note, but we want to think of it for now as a flat note. So remember what the definition of flat is. I'm suggesting to you that the note I'm on is some letter name flat. Could be B flat, a C flat, an F flat, a G flat, any letter name flat. In order to answer what that is, you need to be a bit familiar with some of the notes that sit on that string. And I often argue for students that you should get really good at identifying visually, without having to always calculate it out, visually the names of notes up to the 5th fret. That's a good, healthy starting point to be in command of. Does it take a bit of time? Of course it does. It's a skill. It's a trade. These things need to be worked on in a consistent fashion. They're not things you just get in one day and then boom, it's done. So keep that in mind. I'm not expecting this to be finished overnight. The 2nd fret on that string happens to be the note A. And hopefully, because that's an A, you know that the string itself is the open G string. 2 frets higher than G on any location on the fretboard, on any string, is the note A. Well, here's G, the open string. It's as if the guitar is playing it right here behind the nut. And then 1, 2. There you go. 2 frets up, it becomes an A. But that's not the note we want. We are going to flatten that note by pushing it away, remember, from our guts. Away from the body of the guitar. So it's going to go down in pitch, lower in sound by 1 fret. That makes that 1st fret note called A flat. I will give you 5 seconds to let that sink in, to make sure that you're not just nodding your head up and down, you know, kind of superficially agreeing with me. I want you to know in your bones that that is an A flat. A is the note hopefully you're aware of on that string, because you know where the natural notes are on any string, theoretically. You can figure that out. And then backtrack it 1 fret lower, further down the fretboard, lower in sound to the note A flat. And I am pushing this a lot and harping on it to make sure it's clear. And if you've already gotten it, I apologize for ranting so long. But if you haven't got it yet, really try to make sure that what I just said over the last 5 minutes or so is really clear to you. Play it over and over until you get it. That note is called A flat. We are going to play a scale from this note called A flat, and we will play it all the way up to the next A flat an octave higher. An octave is just another name for a different type of interval. So we're going to do this visually, or I'm going to do it visually first, just by employing my mental map, if you will, knowledge of the interval scale formula for a major scale. So here I go. This is easy. I start on this note and I start hitting tones and semitones. Here I go. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And again, I'm hoping you can hear that that sounds like a major scale, but I will shut up and I will play it as I usually do to make sure you hear it in its totality without my banter in the background. So here it is, A flat major. On the way back down. So, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Easy. Backwards. Semitone, tone, 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 semitone, tone, tone. You got to see it both ways. At least I'm suggesting that you've got to see it both ways. Once again, you don't have to do any of this stuff, but I'm assuming you're interested in what I'm talking about because there are aspects of your guitar experience that are baffling you. Like, you can play, you can do things, but you're not making connections to certain concepts that would make you feel like, oh, finally, I finally get it. That's a good feeling when that happens. So that's why I'm really pushing to make sure you're seeing things from different perspectives. And of course, for the time being, we've been doing everything on just single strings. You might even be scratching your head going, why isn't he doing this? We will be, eventually, but you can't see the intervals as easily yet when you do that. It's an A flat major scale. Some of you probably already know that pattern. It's very common. There's nothing magical about it, but we're doing exactly the same thing on this string. I'm just playing an octave lower here. Same idea. I could go, sorry. Exactly the same thing. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Don't worry. Okay, now the hard part. At least for a while, it feels hard because you do need to think. It's very cognitive. But the more you're there and the more you're looking and the more you're associating a string location and a fret location with a note name, the more the recall starts to set in as to what the name is. It'll never be completely immediate unless you're really familiar with certain zones, but it will be functionally immediate. Like, you have ways to figure it out like that, if needs be, right? And that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. I would argue most players are probably there, especially when they get higher. Even some of the gurus on YouTube, they're up here and you can see them hesitating. They're thinking it through. They know it, but they're just thinking it through. They don't just grab the note name out of the blue. They do in areas that they're obviously much more familiar with, but everybody's got kind of a foggy area on the fretboard that they just can't seem to have a good visual map on. So we got to work on that. Anyway, that aside, we got to go back and do the notes. So obviously we started on an A flat and we ended on an A flat, and what's the rule? You can only have some kind of an A, some kind of a B, some kind of a C, etc. You can't have two letters that are the same, one after the other. It makes things too complicated. So if this is A flat, we're going to do this now, and I go up 2 frets, it's the correct distance, but what's the note? Well, you could call it A sharp, but as I just mentioned, this is already A flat. We've already got some kind of an A. We can't call this A sharp, but we can call it B flat, because there's the B on the 4th string. All right, so that's B flat. 2 frets up, luckily just lands on a note C. Sometimes we luck out and we get on a natural note and we don't have to overthink it. So we have A flat, B flat, B flat to C, which makes sense because B to C is only 1 fret. B flat to C would be 2 frets. Now we need a semitone. C to some kind of a D. Well, D is 2 frets up. If you can see it on my fretboard here. D is 2 frets up from C, but I don't want this note, I want that note. So if that's a D, and I can't use another kind of C, when I go here, this has to be some kind of a D. And it's D flat. It's going lower in pitch from the normal D. You can think of it that way. So we have C moving to D flat. We got a lot of flats in this key. A flat, B flat, C, D flat. Rest turns out to be E flat. Lucky again, E flat, F, G, and then finally A flat. That may take a bit of repetition for you to go through this process and get into the habit of really thinking through the note names. Nothing can be lost. I get this argument a lot from students when I talk about notes. I get, you know, if you held a gun to Jimi Hendrix's head, he probably couldn't name the notes he was playing. So a lot of people, I'm not sure on that, but that's my humble guess. A lot of people will argue, therefore, why do I need to learn the notes if in general he didn't need to do that stuff? He worked with patterns and he worked with, I'm assuming, strings and frets and visual things and sound, of course, and he was also a very creative musically. So he did have that X factor, whatever quality that is. I don't have it. I don't know if you have it. So he probably had a skill set that allowed him to kind of get away without knowing the notes. Really? That's my guess. If I'm wrong on that, please let me know, because I don't follow the history of Mr. Hendrix, but that's my current understanding. And so he becomes sort of the model upon which, well, if he didn't do it, why do I need to do it? You don't need to do it. That's the whole point of this. I'm not making anybody do it. I am suggesting, however, that if you do know this stuff, it helps you to understand the bigger picture of what's going on. And since we're not all Jimi Hendrixes, we probably need to know this stuff. We don't have the X factor. We'd like to think we do, and maybe in some areas we do, but not this stuff usually. So we have to think about it. So let's try another note. Let's just go to, by the way, that was the key of A flat, therefore. Let's do another one. There's my dog barking away. Somebody's coming home. Let's do, I'll pick one from the manual here. This would be good. This is the example that I gave of walking you through how to do this process, and because it's already there, I should do this again for you. So let's do the key of G flat. You're now going to play a scale called G flat major. You've probably never even heard of that. You've probably never played any songs in the key of G flat. Or if you did, perhaps you were playing with a capo on your guitar and strumming away to some tune, you didn't know that you were in the key of A flat, or excuse me, G flat. That's okay. That's fine. That's where you're at, and you know, you can still play the song beautifully. But not knowing what's actually going on because of where the capo may be, in my world, that just drives me nuts. I can't stand to not be aware of what's happening. Anyway, let's do the key of G flat. It is outlined in the 4th issue. And we're just going to play the natural notes, not including the G flat. We will start with the G flat note. And hopefully you recognize that that's a G flat. Quick review if you don't. The string is an E. F is always 1 fret up, so that's the 1st fret. F to G is always 2 frets apart. So I'm going to take that G and I'm going to flatten it. That's how I came to that realization that that space, that 2nd fret, 1st string, is G flat. Okay? Here I go. I'm going to play the G flat, And then I'm just going to play the natural notes, the A, the B, the C, the D, the E, the F, and I'll end it on G flat. And listen to the sound of it. There's no question that thing does not sound like a major scale. There will be a lot of altering to do to push that sucker, alter it to make it sound like a G flat major scale. So the G flat notes are fine. We're good there. We've got two of them, an octave apart as usual. So we've got G flat. We go up a tone. What's that note? Well, hopefully you know that the note beside it at the 5th fret, or you could figure this out anyway, is an A. And we're going to, excuse me, lower that A to an A flat. So we're going to turn the A note that I previously played. This is all notated in the issue, so you can follow along. I'm going to take that A and flatten it. So I'm now on the 4th fret. G flat, A flat. I can't use another G, as you already know. We have to go to an A sound. I could call it G sharp, but I can't go G flat and then G sharp. It's just not allowed. You are forbidden, as they used to say in the old texts, you are forbidden to do such things. Let's just go with the fact that that's just the way it is, and it does make things more easy to comprehend. All right, so we have the A flat going to, G flat going to A flat. Hopefully that's not a big deal. Now I'm going to go a tone up from the A flat, which sounds like a major scale, but I'm not landing on a fret that I'm familiar with. But I probably know the two notes on either side of it. I know that this is an A, and I know that that's a B. I've already used up some kind of an A, so I have to call this guy B flat. That's where I am. So now I've got G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat. Think about C flat for a second. There's the semitone. I'm not on a C. C is actually, the note C, the natural note C, is actually 1 fret higher than what I'm actually on. Here's where I am. Here's C right next door. But if I take the C and flatten it, I can call this C flat. Now if you're looking down on it, your brain might be going, but wait Stephen, that's a natural note. It's called B. You're not wrong. So we bump into these kinds of situations once in a while. In the context of the scale that we are playing, we're not going to call what is a B note for 90% of your awareness on the fretboard. We are going to refer to it as a C flat. Confusing as that may be, all you're doing is keeping one letter per note. You've got some kind of a G, some kind of an A, some kind of a B, so we've already used that up, some kind of a C. It is a B note, but we're calling it C flat. I hope you can swallow that okay. So C flat, 2 frets up, becomes D flat. For the same reasons, D is just above, I flattened it. D flat to E flat, because E is right above that, I just flattened it. Lowered it in sound, right? E to E flat. E flat, luckily once again, goes a whole tone up, lands on an F. Because E to F is 1 semitone, E flat to F would be 2 semitones, which is a whole tone. Whew. And then finally F, 1 semitone above, not 2, is G flat. So here's what we've got. There's that familiar sound once again. Not an easy scale to think about. Not a scale or a key that you're going to get a lot of pieces written in, although never say never. It does exist. It's functional. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's good to be able to know how to do it. And so I outlined that process for you in the manual. And you can take a look through there. And then, of course, I throw the exercises your way, and I leave it up to you to figure out what the letter names in various keys, flat keys, will be. And it's exactly the same procedure that we just went through. You can only, what I do is start with, let's say it's A flat, which we've done. I'll take the A flat and I'll draw another A flat up at the high end, and that's all written out for you in the manual here. And then I just fill in the other letters as if they were natural letters. I'll go A flat, okay, then some kind of a B, C, D, E, F, G, and then I end on A flat again, because that's the key I'm in. Then all I do is go into those natural letters and start moving them around according to the interval scale formula for a major scale. I make things closer together if I need semitones by using flats, or I make things further apart by using flats, so that I get tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And when that's all done, and you can stand back and take a peek at it, you'll see that a certain number of notes are flat in the key of A flat. Some are not flattened, they're just left alone, and others are flattened. And the number of flats, just like the number of sharps in the previous issue, the number of flats that exist in that key becomes what we call the key signature, if you've ever heard of that term. The key signature, and I'll show you this in later issues, you see it at the front end of a piece of music. It's that cluster of sharps, if you're reading music or you're wanting to, clusters of sharps at the beginning of the song, and they get repeated on every staff, or clusters of flats that get repeated on. It's just something that orients you to the overall sound or the key that the piece is written in. That's where that stuff's coming from. It's not just arbitrary. It's not, you know, somebody just didn't make that up. It's a shorthand code for what makes up the scale that makes up the song that you're reading. That's what it is. I hope that makes sense to you. So once again, at the end of issue 4, I've given you the answers to the exercises. They're all on fretboards here. You can see that. Don't look at this. Don't look at this and copy and go, look, I did it, I know, I understand it. It's like using a calculator to solve your math stuff. It's important that you take the time to, oh gosh, I'll get in trouble for this word. I'll use the word, you gotta struggle a bit. You just have to push your mind a little bit to get comfortable with it. Having said all that, in your playing, it's my guess that you are not going to be spending a ton of time in the flat key world in general. You may in fact be doing it already, but you might have, if you're a strumming guitarist, you might be working with it from the point of view of having a capo on your guitar, and you're playing what look like familiar chord shapes, but you're not aware that you're in a flat key. As far as you're concerned, excuse me, many students just think, oh, I'm playing D and A and G relative to their capo. That's how guitarists tend to think about it, when in fact they may not, those are not actually the chords that you're playing. They just look like those chords, and that should be maybe something that we tap into a little further down the road, if that would be valuable to you. So there you have it. I mean, I talked a bit at length here, even though the content I think is generally shorter than the third issue. It was the same material, just being done from the flat side of things, making sure that you understand the mechanics, the mental map of tones and semitones for the major scale. I think you do. And then going back and then really thinking through in a logical way, what are the names of those notes? In doing so, I'm not asking you to memorize where they're located. The game here is to just go and identify them over time, in its own time, without even you knowing it. The knowledge of where notes are located on your fretboard kind of sneak up and bite you in the butt. And you don't even know it happened until that fateful day when you just come to your guitar and you reach up for a note and your brain goes, oh yeah, that's a C. Oh, yeah, it is. The only reason that happened is because you've been there a lot, maybe through chords or playing licks or something, and you've taken the time to remind your mind that that location on the 3rd string, 5th fret is something called C. It's not just a 3rd string, 5th fret. That was really the point of this whole series, by the way. I had so many students who see the fretboard as only strings and frets and fingers. If music were constructed from that awareness alone, how would trumpet players work? How would piano players work? How would any other instrument work other than generally a string instrument? So it's a fundamental issue among players that they're missing the foundation, either by choice, because they're just wanting to avoid it, or they don't even know what they don't even know, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a healthy, small I ignorance. I'm just not aware of what it is I'm not aware of until I become aware of it, and then perhaps I'll work on it. That's perfectly normal. And hopefully this is helping with that. So there you go. Flat keys are now covered. Again, the big picture. We're almost finished now with the major scale, so stick with me here. The big picture over the last 4 issues, in reality 4 issues, has been, can you play the sound of a major scale somewhere from on the lower end of the fretboard, because you need space. Sorry, I hit the mic. Can you play any major scale from any note, let's say somewhere between the 1st and 3rd fret of your guitar, or even from the open strings and up. So you can do that visually using the interval formula, and you can do it from the alphabet approach where you're actually identifying the notes. Even though when you look down on this thing, there's nothing there that tells you that's a G, you have to have been shown that it is. And then you have to internalize that information unless you alter your strings, and that's a very common thing for guitarists to do. Don't do that for now. That's a G. Same for pianos. They have to learn that white note in between these 2 black notes is whatever it is. They internalize that. It's easier though because they're color-coded. I pick on the piano a lot. We're not color-coded. We have to have a different mental map. And away you go. You work it. Now, if you're a reader of music, you'll be exposed to what I'm talking about every time you learn a piece of music. So it tends to happen faster if you're a reader, because this information gets put into the page. You can see it there. There's a key signature. You can see the notes. You've learned to read the notes and the rhythms. And it all becomes one big experience of understanding music. But let's face it, contemporary players these days don't tend to approach learning the guitar by reading music. They approach it by ear and quite often aligning what they hear with tablature. So that's okay, that gets things started, but and you can technically get very good at doing that sort of stuff. But again, there is a core bit of information that's missing, and I know I keep reiterating that, but it's for good reason. So there you have it. I've got one more issue, not a full issue, to talk about what I'd like you to be able to do with the major scale, but it's a very tiny issue. I'll get that out shortly. And that's it. Once we're done there, we have enough knowledge of the major scale that we can start to move outward into more interesting ideas about how music works on the guitar, and make sense of it all and make sure it's all nicely connected. So once again, you're not suffering the overwhelm that I keep seeing players experience, and we don't want that. We want it, I'm not saying it has to be strictly a linear process, but at least a connected one, like a web even would be, like the web, like the internet or a spider's web. That's sufficient. That this, oh yeah, I understand why the minor pentatonic is what it is because I understand what the major scale was. That makes sense now to me. Nobody just woke up one day and invented the minor pentatonic scale and gave it a name. That didn't happen. So when you learn patterns, that's a start. It sounds cool. You can do a lot with it. But if your brain says, well, minor pentatonic is this thing, and you don't know that minor pentatonic could be this thing, or this thing, or even this thing, then you're missing out on a whole bunch of really cool connection It's going to make your learning and your playing much easier to handle. Okay, I've talked enough. My tea is cold. Issue 4 is in the books. I'll see you in the next video with a fresh issue. Remember, from this point on, you're getting both together, which I hope will be a little more consistent and easier to follow. You know, and by all means, if you find this video valuable, leave comments below. Share it around. I mean, the more love, the better. It's all good. And if you don't agree with anything that I'm saying, leave me a comment. If you do agree, leave me a comment. I have a thick skin. You're not going to hurt my feelings, and it's all good. So, Steve Dempster, Dempster Guitar Studio. I'll see you in the next issue. Thanks so much. Bye.